Okay, look. An attentive viewer might begin to attribute a pattern to my taste that may or may not be accurate upon seeing this as my second video. As my friends like to sometimes joke, I am taking the play a game made after 2010 challenge, impossible, and they would be mostly right in that assessment. My affinity for games of the mid-90s to early 2000s is mired mostly in my nostalgia, but also equally by the sort of charm games have when they're the first of their kind. Armored Core 2 was released in October of 2000 as a launch title for the PlayStation 2 in North America, so it has a certain look and feel to it that reveals a curiosity about, and deep unfamiliarity with, that machine's architecture and methods of control. Its refusal to operate like anything we would hope for in our modern times is a kitschy novelty when we return to it over 20 years after its release. It should be a mere passing chuckle into the breath before we set the game down and pick up a more confidently built something that From Software has made in the last decade or so. For me though, well, I have a type. I didn't get a PS2 until several years into its life cycle, around 2005, and I picked up Armored Core 2 from a local retailer, remembering a brief dalliance with its predecessor on a demo disc that I played at a friend's house 7-ish years before. I must have played it quite a bit, since hearing these sound effects so many years later awoke an ancient yearning to return to those days. Harvesting footage for this video stung me with a twinge of regret, choosing to make a video about Armored Core 2 because I find the sound design of Armored Core 1 so fascinating. In any case, I remembered being excited by the concept of piloting such a detailed and complex machine that I could customize, but since then I had discovered what a Gundam was, and that frame of reference informed a growing interest in giant robots. I played it, I loved it, and I don't think I ever saw what could be considered an ending. I did find myself at the top of the arena rankings eventually, but I don't recall it in very much detail, and I filed it under a single word descriptor in my memory: hard. I played its sequel, Armored Core 3, shortly thereafter, but I remember even less about that other than its very cool box art. I'm a sentimental person, so I held on to my PS2 in a few choice games, and Armored Core 2 was one of those. It sits on my shelf to this day. The announcement of Armored Core 6 at the end of 2022 sent a shock of lightning through my body that would animate my robot-thirsty skeleton for months to come. I had only briefly encountered the middle generation of Armored Core games through a friend here or there. The genre was not popular in my circles, but I always looked longingly and from a great distance at the hard robot game before resuming whatever obsession I had locked my sights on at the time. But this announcement made me wonder, was Armored Core 2 good? Or was it, like most of the video games I like, unacceptably painful to look at and play with? Well, viewer, I don't own a capture card, so I spun up an emulator and now here we are. You and me on the frontier of memory, a barren Martian hellscape of smoking wreckage and corporate greed. And I gotta tell ya, it's not looking good. Do some hand stretches, dust off your Eagle Claw style kung fu, and head inside. We have a Mars to conquer. I am not what most people would call physically coordinated or good at video games or whatever domineering goth women are into these days, so my expectations about the challenge before me when I started the game up were high. I was fully ready to bang my head against the glass of the cockpit, both out of frustration and as a result of my poor piloting skills. Little did I know the greatest obstacle would not be my own deteriorating twitch reflexes, but instead would be my puny human brain's lack of multi-threading functionality. That is to say, attempting to pilot an AC requires a level of motor function that I imagine only highly experienced pianists have honed over a lifetime of practice. The first thing a modern gamer will notice is that moving the thumbsticks has no effect on the movement of your bespoke killing machine. Instead, you must use the directional pad of the controller to move forward, backward, and turn. Yes, Armored Core 2 has tank controls. You're a kind of bipedal tank, right? Stepping sideways, however, is a vital part of avoiding damage, so be sure to have your index fingers on the R1 and L1 buttons to manage that. But Josh, the enemy has flown out of my cone of vision. No worries, Raven. To move your camera view up and down, merely press the L2 and R2 buttons, respectively, with your middle fingers to tilt your tumultuous target into view, but keep jamming that square button. We have to keep the pressure up on the enemy AC if we want to become the best boy in all the Mars arena. Run out of ammo? Swap weapons with the triangle button, or activate your left arm's laser sword with the circle button. Of course, you shouldn't let your thumb wander too far from the right stick. You might still want to use it. No, not for camera control. That's what your middle fingers are for. You need to press in on the right stick, not tilt it, silly Billy. This will activate your overboost and allow you to fly directly forward at Mach speeds. Why would you do this? Who knows? The turning speed of your average Armored Core is such that it is impossible to keep a moving target in your sights during this high-speed flight, unless it's directly in front of you. And in mission scenarios, the map is often much too cramped to do anything but fly harmlessly headfirst into the nearest facility wall or out of the mission perimeter. Mind the gap, tap X to jump straight up or hold it to activate a form of minimal flight capability. Well, it's less flight than controlled falling, really, since most ACs don't have the energy capacity for sustained aeronautical maneuvers. More of a jetpack situation there. Anytime your AC lands from a jump without active boosters, though, there's a delay where you lose control entirely. Few moments are as frustrating as this during gameplay, but it certainly lends itself well to the feeling of piloting its story's high def factory. What about the left stick? Pressing it in activates any additional functionality you have attached to your machine, like an anti-missile missile system. Don't tilt it. That doesn't do anything, you idiot. You absolute buffoon. You have a perfectly good entire rest of the controller for movement. So for those keeping track at home, to perform the action you are seeing on the screen right now, I must press forward and left on the D-pad, hold L1, tap L2 at R2, tap and hold X, and tap square. If I want to use multiple weapons, I must find time to swap between them with another face button. That's 7 buttons simultaneously just to circle, strafe, and fire my weapon. Doom Guy is crying right now. And then you still have to dodge incoming attacks, pursue your foe if they leave a weapon range, and avoid hazardous terrain. God save you if you have multiple foes. Watching someone with experience play Armored Core 2 is exactly how it looks when you see someone pretending to play video games and movies. They just jam every single button in a seemingly random pattern, while the conversation takes center stage. But here, there is no time for talk, Mom. We're gaming. Oops, I accidentally discovered the game's secret controls while flailing harmlessly at the controller in a vain attempt to pilot this machine. I'm not panicking, you're panicking. Pressing the R2 and L2 simultaneously will mercifully center your view, making the most difficult control task, which is tilting your camera up and down, a mote simpler. While attempting to do this, you might somehow also press on the right stick, only to find yourself releasing your energy limiter. For around 40 seconds, you have unfettered access to your boosters and energy weapons, at the cost of losing your energy meter entirely for even longer afterwards. This function was essential to my success in the arena, which we will get to later. I couldn't find either of these commands listed in the game's original manual, leading me to believe that these are secret functions intended to be discovered accidentally. It's like a little treat from FromSoft. Thanks, FromSoft. It would be a mere 2 weeks after Armored Core 2's North American release that we would see the emergence of what one would call a modern control scheme that utilized both joysticks in the form of Alien Resurrection for the PlayStation 1. This game was famously panned for its control scheme, only for it to be adopted and made the standard to this day. But for now, we have this, and only this. Piloting an AC is secondary in importance only to its construction. Most of the game's mechanical guts can be found in the garage where you build your war machine. Both the broadness and specificity of the AC customization is staggering to me even now. But that depth cannot be seen from the surface of the murky pond that is Armored Core 2. To understand how your vehicle functions, you must engage in the time-honored tradition eschewed by most gamers called reading a book. Here you can find the intended meaning of all the arcane symbolism that appears beneath each part's entry in the shop or garage. More than simple armor value and weight, there are entire mechanics hidden within AC construction that you could only know about by flipping through your machine's owner's manual. As an example, the hacking stat on head parts will supposedly allow you to open some doors that are otherwise inaccessible. The only way one would know what this does in the first place would be to check the manual, and even having done so, no indication is given whatsoever that a door can be hacked or not. The difference between a door accessible by the right head part and an inaccessible door appears testable only by trial and error. Many doors allow you to destroy the control mechanism a couple feet to the right, so I didn't find it to matter much to my experience. And check this out, even the manual doesn't want to give up Armored Core 2's mystery. This line just has 3 question marks as its description. What nonsensical cipher is required to understand this? Was the manual translator confused? Am I being laughed at by someone in Japan from 24 years ago? While it might be cryptic in nature, playing murder Legos is definitely my favorite part of the game. After picking your head, core, legs, arms, weapons, and back parts, you have access to a panoply of internal and extraneous elements for deeper customization. You can plant bombs in your chest that you can drop as you go, pick a generator to manage the kind of power usage you expect, a radiator to resist overheating during prolonged combat, as well as types of boosters depending on your leg type and mobility needs. If you can dream of a style of core, you can build it, from a lightweight nuisance to a slab of steel with guns bolted to it. The best part of the AC building process is that parts can be sold for whatever you spent on them, more or less making the money a gateway to unlocking more and more available parts, rather than punishing you for experimentation. That's not to say the game makes it convenient for you. Selling or purchasing parts is done so one at a time through a very slow menu, so rebuilds are not a lightning quick affair. Still, you can spend hours experimenting with and tweaking your builds, swapping out parts for entire ACs for missions and arena fights. There are 2 main modes of play in Armored Core 2. You can either accept missions or go fight in the arena. Beginning at rank 50, you must climb your way to the very top to gain the title of Nine Breaker. While your earnings from battle are little at first, towards the top of the arena, each victory will further trivialize your access to high-quality parts, making the rest of the game a much simpler challenge. Additionally, unlike during missions, your ammo and repair expenses are recovered. There's no chance that you will incur debt as a result of some piloting blunder. One of my favorite parts of the arena is the little chunks of world building it does in the profile of each of your opponents. Where the spaces of the game are empty of humanity, here we get to see that there are people with goals and desires and personalities on Mars. Some of the AI pilots are even given quirks based on their unique design or choice of colors. Every single one has an individual and uniquely cool emblem that is themed along with their backstory blurb. The arena is the most lived-in part of the AC2 experience by far. For much of my time in the arena, especially as fights became more difficult, I opted for the heavy weapons approach. Slow turning speeds and my own lack of coordination left me with a strategy of simply attempting to keep the enemy in front of me, so that I might subject them to the cone of annihilation that was my front-facing arsenal. Why dodge if you can simply race to the bottom? I found their number went down much faster than mine. This focus on offense left me eventually with a slow set of load-bearing tanks, or heavy bipedal legs. Most of the AI enemies in the arena were not adept pilots, at least not until the top of 15 or so I was able to perform my patented 7-button shuffle to put them into the dirt. Once I had earned enough money from my fame in the arena, I no longer felt obligated to dodge attacks at all. With the right set of energy weapons and enough AP, I was able to activate my cone of annihilation and smoke any gangster who was dissing my fly girl, thanks mostly to my limiter release. I just had to get a beat on my target for about 5 to 20 seconds before they were reduced to explosions and money. Here is the number 1 ranked AC in the arena. Once you top the charts though, new challenges come to tear you a new extension. None of them are a threat to your supremacy save for the final opponent, Matthias. He's fast, durable, and hits like a Cybertruck, and has the piloting ability to trivialize the cone of annihilation that I had been relying on so heavily. For the first time I felt my strategy of ignoring the game's mechanics entirely was insufficient. I tried everything, my tank build, my medium build, I tried learning to dodge, and that went about as well as expected. I spent more time fighting Matthias than I did on the rest of the arena combined, and I came away from each fight learning nothing but that I am nothing before the great funeral mask. I kept getting close, but in the end, I was always brought low by a superior speed and guile. But I did prevail. How? An exploit I found on YouTube by a Japanese user called APK. Never saw myself using a flamethrower before, but get roasted, Matthias. Missions are an outlet for Armored Core 2's other game design elements as well as its story. When you find your mercenary glands are inflamed, you can accept a mission from one of the several corporations and governmental forces that struggle for control over the Martian economic system. These corporations also happen to manufacture AC parts, giving the impression that the only economy on Mars is war and war accessories. They'll offer a prize for completing their mission, but that number is a dire and heinous falsehood. During missions, you'll expend ammunition and suffer damage to your AC, as happens when you do a Star War.
Here's some money, go see a Star War.
These are expenses that you are responsible for, so at the end of your mission, successful or not, the amount is deducted from your total earnings to make up for this. Should you be unlucky enough to fail in your assigned mission, you will simply lose money, and eventually go into debt. With enough debt, however, you will encounter Armored Core 2's secret difficulty slider, the Human Plus program. Once you reach 50,000 in debt, you'll be shown a cutscene where a pilot, presumably you, is altered to become something more than human. Human with additional material. Human Plus. Afterwards, your debt is wiped away and you have been given a mechanical break from the occasional difficulty generated by the game's control scheme. Each time you go 50,000 in debt thereafter, you'll be enhanced again and again, until you are a truly powerful and freakish cyber jockey, up to 6 times. Each time will unlock an additional feature. The lesson here is that when you go into bullet debt, the only escape is selling your body to science. The dollar amount you take away from each mission is similar in function to a letter-based ranking system in character action games, like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. The more money you take away, the higher your rank, and when the game detects that you are so crushingly terrible at playing it that you can't earn any rank at all, it has the good sense to lessen slightly the incline that is its many systems. Failing missions is a common occurrence in the beginning. If you poorly apportion your ammunition, you can run out in the middle of an operation, either making it completely impossible or forcing you to rely on your close combat weapons that will further endanger your AC. Arm-mounted laser swords in AC2 are lacking in terms of control, and feel very much like an ancestor of FromSoft's contemporary titles in terms of commitment to a long animation. This will lead to attempting over and over to slice your foes, only for you to dash harmlessly forward and miss entirely. Aside from that, you can accidentally just pick up your toys and go home. Many of the mission's maps will have a pair of perimeters displayed on your radar. Once you pass the first boundary, you will receive a warning. Then if you pass the second boundary, you'll be forced to trudge stupidly towards the ammo and AC repair desk, and will maybe be given the opportunity to try again. Lord knows you will need the money. Still, the wall of sound produced by the combination of combat and soundtrack, along with the, shall we say, intense control scheme, makes for a very missable alarm if you are not looking for it. Some missions are retriable, others will advance the story regardless of your outcome, and truly high-stakes missions will elicit a game over screen should you fail to achieve your objective. Save early and save often, or you may, like me, have to repeat your climb upward out of poverty. Commonly, story missions will offer no reward at all. Instead, you will be given some small scrap of narrative that would naturally result in you not being paid, like being forced to flee from a mission or your employer being exploded. This makes choosing a mission into a sort of poverty roulette at first, before your choice of missions narrows to an exclusively narrative focus further into the game. This can be devastating to your funds early on if you don't dominate the arena right away like I did. The AC hungers, father, and not for empty narrative. It hungers for bullets. And bullets are very expensive. Most missions are hallways with drones or turrets with little to no AI that just fire at you whenever you are near. Occasionally you get larger enemies, MTs, or the rare enemy AC that will put up more of a fight. Your mission objective will usually be to eliminate a specific target, destroy all enemies, or keep a specific target from being destroyed. Occasionally you will be asked to plant a bomb or destroy something inanimate. If none of this sounds exciting to you, then you are listening to the words I said. There just isn't a lot going on in these missions, and they represent more than half of the game's runtime of about 8 hours. A more talented and incurious player could probably blow through the same content in around half of that time. The larger set-piece missions were the most fun and interesting, presenting you with a challenge that you might have already encountered in some other shape, but this time taped to a giant robot or a train or a caterpillar tank. The addition of some kind of movement outside of the usual running down a hallway added dimensionality that helped briefly overcome the empty and static nature of the missions. But the worst missions are the ones with environmental effects added on top of the normal threats. Those are fortunately rare. This snow level set in a blizzard had me running around for minutes hunting for camouflaged boxes while being assaulted by an endless stream of aircraft. This is a good time to talk about the map. The select button will bring up your mission map, and it is only barely useful. Controlling your viewing angle is as confusing and uncomfortable as the game's normal controls. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you will have an objective marked on the map, but only if you stumble across that objective in the course of normal exploration. If your mission is to find something, you're required to discard any notion of technological comfort and detect it with your eyeballs. This isn't a problem when the mission is more or less a couple straight lines and then some rooms. But when the mission area is set during a blizzard and your map only renders small chunks of the area, you can learn what it means to hate in smaller increments than you previously thought possible. Someone looking back from a position of spoiled nostalgia might assume the narrative of AC2 to be predictably from Softian, choosing to build its world naturally through diegesis rather than pointed exposition. It does not do this. You are briefed by your handler, Nell Ottler, on the broad goings-on Mars, as your avatar is a newcomer to the Red Planet. Characters are scant in number and obvious depth, except for Nell. Nell cares, with only the arena blurbs describing obvious wants or needs by human actors in the corporate warscape. There is depth hinted at within the dialogue, with the occasional charming regional accent to drip humanity into an otherwise lifeless background. And I mean that literally. Life is almost wholly absent from the Martian landscape and the game's interface. At every turn you are interfacing with machines, making decisions about machines, doing battles with machines, and the human stakes are hidden behind the wastes of Martian domes and long-abandoned alien facilities. The remnants of Martian civilization are only technically biological in nature too, since you need a bioscanner to lock onto them. They still look and behave like robots, so of course the story lacks weight. Its basics can be summed up pretty quickly. You are a brand new Raven, a mercenary AC pilot who has just arrived on Mars. With stars in your eyes, you have no obvious goal but to make a living plying your trade. After a brief initiation, you are let loose on either the arena or the mission menu. At first, there is little what one would call a plot to be found in the struggle between corporations. The primary forces consist of Zeo Matrix, LCC, Emrod, and Baladin, with Earth's governmental forces dipping into the mix later in the story. You'll be offered missions by these corporations without prejudice after just having worked against them in a previous mission. During the course of those missions, you will encounter a group of Earth government special forces called the Frighteners. They are led by the very cool and mysterious Leos Klein, who wishes to usher in a new government for Mars. To do this, he begins a coup d'etat and attempts to crash the Martian moon Phobos into the Martian surface. You thwart his plans at the behest of Earth government and are left with a parting message from your handler that asks the same questions that I had. While I did not have any strong feelings about the work asked of my little AC, I did come away from the game's missions with an intense hatred of one of its corporations.
Please attack Zeomatrix's energy collection facility. The target is the Rectenna installation in the Hellas Plain. Solar devices blanket the area, collecting sunlight and converting it into energy for use in major Martian cities. The goal is to undermine the public trust in Zeomatrix by destroying their ability to supply a necessary commodity, power. Destroy the facility and all Rectenna devices. The facility is guarded by cannons and a squadron of fighter planes. Therefore, we will be attacking at night, when we should encounter less resistance. We will also be assembling an MT support team to provide you with cover. Failure is not an option. As a Raven, I'm sure you understand.
I avoided working for Emrod unless it was impossible because I could not stand the voice acting I had to endure during their mission briefings. On top of being nakedly evil, the way the performer hits his R's causes my body to shudder like I was being forced to touch a stranger's liquid diarrhea. Your pilot is as lifeless a character as the rest of the story, and there are seemingly no stakes for you other than an interest in cold hard bucks. This is fitting with the aesthetic, but rings hollow in the end. I didn't come to this or any other video game for rich story though. I'm here to cause violence on behalf of my open and wanton billfold. I think it may be a result of its place in the PlayStation 2 release schedule, being among some of the first games on the console, but Armored Core 2 is a desperately lonely place to spend your time. Only when I saw the occasional car on an abandoned roadway did I get the feeling that anything on Mars had been built for human life in the first place. The levels are scaled to the size of an an AC and other large machinery, so to see some tiny vehicle parked in a silent abandoned city is a jarring reminder of your size, bringing into focus a sense of scale that had been hidden by the level and sound design. Seeing places where human life ought to be, but isn't, is a haunting atmosphere that, while I might guess is unintentional, adds a lot of nostalgic charm to the game. There are no humans in Armored Core 2. We get glimpses of them in cutscenes, but never straight on. There are human voices, quite ably acted for the time, and we assume that everyone speaking is human. They have accents, affectations, quirks. However, the complete absence of the human form, save for the bipedal simulacrum of certain AC designs, is the loneliest part of the game's design. The designs of the machines are excellent, giving a send-up to Macross, Battletech, and of course Gundam. They run the gamut from insectile and alien to brutalist war machines, and the robust color and emblem editor allow you to submerge yourself wholly into the goings-on of Armored Core 2. Literal aliens exist too in the form of disorder units, leftover living machines from an ancient Martian civilization, and their bug-like shapes imply a lineage between themselves and human AC design that while I'm not sure is canon, seems like it might be. The sounds of Armored Core 2's world are a conundrum. At once feeling heavy and distant, your weighty footsteps in the crash of landing from a jump are contrasted against the weakness of your boosters and cartoonish bleeps and bloops of your weapon. An exception here is for the heaviest weapons that crash loudly enough to shock the player as much with sound as the guns do to your AC. Barrages from smaller ordnance, however, plink harmlessly against your machine even when doing significant damage. There's more alarm generated by system messages than weapon impacts in a lot of cases, leading you to the occasional surprise death if you don't keep careful eye on your AP. Energy weapons, with a couple of notable exceptions, are the worst offenders here. It was strange to have an opportunity to directly compare the sound design of Armored Core 2 with its predecessor, as the quality of Armored Core 1 to me was much higher.
System engaged.
Seems to be much more granular attention to the size of the AC and what that means for how it sounds, with attention being given to even the sound of the AC turning. Armored Core 2's soundtrack is immaculate. Just listen to it. I am not joking when I say replaying this game and listening to its soundtrack expanded my taste in music. I am now afflicted with whatever disease makes you like breakcore as a genre. The music adds further to the ethereal distance I feel when wandering the straight lines of various futuristic facilities of the game's missions. There is a great emptiness implied by the combination of hallways, up-tempo electronic music, and early PS2 graphics that gives way to a certain liminality that has grown popular online lately. The final mission lacks music entirely, letting the emptiness expand into the space just before the final conflict, where the sounds of combat ring hollow against Martian walls. In the end, I didn't find my playthrough of Armored Core 2 difficult, and as a result I didn't bear the shame of being chosen for genetic upgrades for my incompetence. The only real roadblock to success was the game's control scheme. The greatest challenge to my ability, past adjusting to that, was ranking up in the arena, which itself was mostly trivial once I discovered my ability to release my energy limiter. I have to admit that I was somewhat disappointed by all of this. I knew it would be difficult to play, but I also expected myself to overcome that difficulty and sharpen my abilities to the point of Zen dominance over its challenges. I fancied my future self to be like the blind samurai, who, while handicapped by the circumstance of clunky controls, would come to defeat his opponents with a haunting grace and calm that sighted opponents could never aspire to. Instead, I solved the problem of AC design quickly, met with no memorable characters or plot beats attached to him, and largely ruined my memory of the game that had otherwise been vaguely entombed along with my good feelings with it. Exhuming its corpse and exposing it to the elements of recent memory was not a useful experience, and yet, I can't help but feel better for having slogged through it. I still love Armored Core 2. Armored Core 2 is the video game equivalent of punching in a dream. You know how things should work, but the core functions have been impaired by its absurd logic. You feel like that if you were given long enough to adjust, you might just be able to forget that nagging feeling in the back of your head that this isn't quite how things ought to be. If you were given long enough, you could find yourself dipping into the half-lucid stream of consciousness that makes of you a blur of missiles, a rain of bullets, and a storm of moonlight slashes. Never before have I been so roundly reminded of the dissonance between my intent and my actions, saying quite a lot about the way I live my life. Taking this further, one must wonder if we really want what we think we want, or if the question itself is the point. I decided that I probably should have picked up Armored Core 6 instead, but well, I can't help but have a type. Thanks for watching.